Hello everyone, Minute Plus Meditation here. It is Saturday, May the 4th, first Saturday of the month. So try to, cultivate and practice the 5 first Saturdays. So if you don't know what that is, then go to the internet and look it up. 5 first Saturdays, Immaculate Heart of Mary. From the first reading, Acts chapter 16, we're in now. So Paul takes Timothy, he's going through this part, this area of Lystra and Iconium. So he wants Timothy to accompany him, and this is where Paul, there's a practical reality to him. He could have actually fought the issue and refused to have Timothy not circumcised, because he knew that circumcision in and of itself was no longer required by the Lord, but there was a lot of Jewish people in that area, so he wanted Timothy to be an effective preacher. So obviously with Timothy's consent, because getting circumcised as a grown man is we're talking commitment, but he has him circumcised. All right, so in order to be that he could actually, his words would be heard by the Jewish people. So this is what we would call a temporary concession, to achieve a greater good, and it's not a it's not a breaking of principle. It's an application. It's a way to reach people with something that is possible. Okay, so they do that, or Timothy goes through that, and then it says, as they went from town to town, they delivered to them for observance the decisions that had been reached by the apostles and elders who were in Jerusalem. So the churches were strengthened in the faith and increased in numbers daily. And that is truly beautiful. So the decisions of the apostles are precisely that circumcision is no longer required, all right? And it's in order to become a Christian. This was seismic. This was huge. This was like tsunamic in terms of the early church. We just don't appreciate this anymore as Gentiles, how massive this was. The Holy Spirit had to intervene, and even several times, because remember, Peter had that vision 3 times. The Lord said, eat this unclean food, which meant, in other words, welcome the Gentiles into the church. Go and proactively preach to the Gentiles and welcome them into the church. And even the issue of circumcision had to be struggled with. So they delivered the decisions of the apostles, which was clearly inspired by the Holy Spirit. And as a result, this good news builds up the church, and that's what it should do. And even if it's a difficult decision, it should build up the church. Now, just think of the pagan ears that heard the words of Humanae Vitae back in the late 1960s. And many people left the church, theologians wouldn't teach what the Vicar of Christ was teaching. Like, all these things should build up the church. This is a massive issue, contraception, artificial contraception. And yet people defied the church, defied the Vicar of Christ, ultimately defying Christ. And then what did they do? These arrogant people, they drew a line between, well, I'm loyal to Christ, but I don't have to, this thing about the church, or I even love the church, but within the church I can choose this and that. It's pathetic, really. It's a complete lack of formation, and sometimes it's just pure, unadulterated arrogance. When you start doing this kind of stuff, this should have built the church up because it was the truth. Clearly that encyclical was inspired by the Holy Spirit, and we are reaping the tragic, horrible consequences of turning our backs on Christ, teaching us through the church and the Vicar of Christ. I could go on and on about this, but you get my point here. This should build up the church, but we got to be receptive. We got to be receptive. If we're not receptive, then we're just going to, get into a fighting mode, and our arrogance is going to kick in, our pride and so on. And that we want to avoid at all cost. Okay, over to the gospel. So Jesus says, during the supper, we're back at the Last Supper. This is John chapter 15. During the supper, before he departed to the Father, which means his passion and death, Jesus said to the disciples, if the world hates you, be aware that it hated me before it hated you. If you belong to the world would love you as its own. Because you do not belong to the world, but I have chosen you out of the world, therefore the world hates you. Now, what is the world here? Well, in St. John's Gospel, the term world, the word world, is used in different ways. God so loved the world, he gave his only son. So he loved the world in the sense that he loves creation. He loves you and me as the pinnacle of his creation. That's good. But the world, the way John uses it here, is referring to those forces marshaled against Christ and his kingdom. And they're ultimately, sort of in the background, the puppeteer is Satan and the demons who are orchestrating things in such a way as to lead us away from God. This is the world, and the world will always hate us. So we got to listen to these words of Jesus. Standards right now in the world, North America particularly, are just going into the tank. They're going down the toilet. Let's just admit it, into the garbage dump. With the dictatorship of moral relativism talked about by Pope Benedict XVI. I mean, everything is turned upside down. You can claim to be any gender you want. And it goes on and on and on. No-fault divorce, abortion, right up. Now they're even talking in this stupid country, not just stupid country, but on the Parliament Hill in this country, about the possibility of putting a child to death up to 1 year after birth. And this is the world. This is the world. This is demonic. This is horrible stuff. And people just don't get it. And they will never get it unless they give themselves to Christ and him crucified, who sheds light on this evil darkness that is seeking to overtake us. So Jesus has warned us here. You and I need to be prepared. Not we go looking for a fight and all this kind of stuff, but we got to be open-eyed about this stuff. We are in a spiritual battle. So you and I, stay close to Christ, be faithful to prayer, receive the sacraments often. These are the sure things that keep us close to Christ and keep us spiritually strong. God bless you.